Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating new study that came up in Neuroscience in Nature, where these researchers recorded the electrical activities of the brain of more than 3,000 neurons in these subjects and discovered the clearest evidence yet as to how the human brains represents inferential reasoning. While these participants learned and relearned simple, for example, associations, their hippocampal neurons formed highly structured, high dimensional, geometric patterns that appeared only when the participants successfully inferred new rules. And whether they learned these new rules via trial and error or simply just through verbal instructions of the researchers. And these findings reveal that the hippocampus, long known for mapping physical space within the brain, also constructs abstract cognitive maps that support reasoning, flexibility, and conceptual knowledge within the human brain. And this study offers a rare, detailed view as to how thought is physically embodied in neural activity and may inform future approaches in treating, for example, memory and decision making. But more importantly, because in this channel we also connect neuroscience to future next generation of AI as well as humanoid system. More importantly, at the end, we will also connect these findings as to what it could potentially mean for the next generations of humanoids and AI systems. So let's talk about it. A recent study published in Nature has given scientists the most detailed view to date as to how the human neurons represent the act of reasoning. Researchers recorded the electrical activities from more than 3,000 neurons in these volunteers with epilepsy who were undergoing several clinical trials. While these participants learned and adapted to shifting rules in a simple task, their hippocampal neurons formed highly structured activity patterns that revealed how the brain embodies abstract thinking. And today we're going to talk about this paper, and we're going to also connect it into how it could pertain to the next generation of AI as well as humanoids. One of the major findings of this study was that the researchers found out that the hippocampus of these participants appeared to recognize its activity from a disordered pattern into precise geometric structures in high dimensional spaces. These structured patterns appeared only when participants successfully reasoned about the new rules that they were presented with, showing that the hippocampus does far more than mapping just the physical space. It also constructs cognitive maps that allows humans to infer, generalize, and adapt. And this is extremely important because this is not very common, for example, in AI models. This study also produced another remarkable finding in that the participants were taught the associations through verbal instructions rather than trial and error form the same structured neural representation, which means that the hippocampus can encode conceptual knowledge not only from direct experiences but also from linguistic transmission. In other words, for them to being told what to do. And so human beings can therefore build neural models of situations that have never they've been personally encountering with, but simply through communication only. In other words, no direct experiences, but something that somebody just tells you to do. This research is a beautiful milestone for neuroscience because it offers something the field has been chasing for decades: direct evidence as to what reasoning looks like inside the human brain. Scientists have always known that humans make inferences, switch mental models, or recognize when the rules of the world change. But the biological mechanism behind the ability that have been frustratingly hard to isolate is pertinent and shown in the study. Most theories have relied on behavior, for example, indirect imaging, or computational models. However, this study shows that the fact of reasoning produces an identifiable structured shift in the actual neural activities of the human brain. And the key insights is that abstract thought is not a ghostly internal experience that floats above our biology. It's a physical event in actuality. As the participants here, for example, recognized that the environment had changed and reorganized their understanding of the task, their hippocampal neurons actually recognized that as well. The neurons did not simply fire more or fire less. They formed stable geometric patterns that reflected the new internal model that the person adopted based on the change rules in the study. When reasoning succeeded, these patterns became clean, orderly, and parallel across context. And so when reasoning failed, the pattern remained disorganized. This finding reveals something extremely profound in that the human brain does not store abstract concepts as verbal ideas or static memories. In fact, it expresses them as structured geometry in high dimensional space within the brain. To think abstractly is to reshape those geometric structures within the brain. The hippocampus here is not only cataloging where we are in a physical space, it is actually mapping where we are in a conceptual space. When you infer that a rule has changed, for example, you literally move into a different region of that conceptual map, and the neural geometry recognizes to match that particular shift. This finding matters in a physical term in that it points to a principle that reasoning is measurable, it's tractable, and it's mechanistic. It is not something mystical, but a coordinated transition from one representational structure to another. The discovery here also is that this transition has a clear neural fingerprint that opens up the door to new scientific possibilities, for example. It means that we can begin to study thought the same way that we've studied memory or vision, for example, not just through behavior, but by examining the actual structure of neural representations within the human brain. And for any field imagining deeper integration between humans and intelligent systems, this is also a foundational insight, because if reasoning has structure, if it reshapes the geometry of the neural activities, and if that geometry can be detected by models, for example, then abstract thought becomes something that can actually be interfaced with. This is where, for example, symbiotic intelligence vision start to tie in. The move that we understand the physical architecture of thought, the closer we get to systems that can interpret human cognitive states, adapt to them, as well as collaborate with them in real time. The way in which this discovery has profound implication for the next generation of AI humanoids in terms of symbiotic intelligence is that the core thesis is that humans and intelligent systems will co-adapt by integrating biosignals, cognition, and artificial reasoning into a shared loop. These new findings support this vision by showing that the human brain already operates on structured internal models that are both learnable as well as interpretable. If reasoning, for example, has a geometric signature inside the hippocampus in this case, it becomes possible to imagine future artificial systems that can read, mirror, and or collaborate with these biological patterns within the brain rather than treat the brain as just a opaque box. And so symbiotic intelligence requires alignment between the human state and the machine representations. So, for example, we have talked plenty here that although we want to believe that these LLM models, for example, do reasoning, in actuality, if you compare it to the human brain or biological brain, they actually don't do that type of a reasoning because they are purely text-based. And this study shows that the brain uses organized and consistent structures, biological structures, to represent new context that is represented with. The more predictable and measurable these structures are, the easier it becomes for machines to interface with them, because that's how machines work. In future humanoids, for example, or cognitive assistants, they could track changes in these neural maps through biosignals and infer shifts in human context and adapt their behavior accordingly to the human shifting in their minds. The research also suggests that the verbal communication and the experiential learning create similar neural outcomes in actuality, which strengthens the idea that symbiotic intelligence could use speech, physiological signals, aka biosignals, or environmental cues to synchronize with the human's internal state. And lastly, this study marks a step towards understanding the brain not just as a biological organ, but also as a representational system with principles that can be modeled, complemented, and or extended. By revealing the physical architecture of inference here, we bring neuroscience closer to the technological ambition that we are building towards, especially in symbiotic intelligence, for example, where it depends on bringing the gap between the human cognition and the machine cognition. And these findings, among others, show that the bridge is more structured and more accessible than we previously thought. I hope you liked today's video. I'll do more of these where I swift through all the new coming research in neuroscience and connecting them to a potential next generation of AI and or humanoids. And I will also link this paper or article in the description box below. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.